This is for the people that have an interest, the people that want to be involved.
There was no collusion at all.
This is for the people that are upset and looking for a place to use their voice.
Both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either.
This is for the people that want to make a difference, for the people that want to be on the right side of history.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
And I get it. In today's society, it's difficult to have a political opinion and to make it be known. This can be due to fear or because you feel like you don't understand what's going on.
In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
But if he can do it, so can you. Join me every Sunday on Backstories, where we'll discuss all the top political stories and how it applies to all of us. And trust me, this is not your everyday show on politics. Welcome back to Backstories, everybody. I am the host, Brandon Dais, as always, coming to you from Ohio this Sunday to talk politics, and I'm very excited to be here because there's so much to report on, so much to get to you. I'm going to start off with our first segment, a special prosecution, which is my segment that is documenting all of the dealings of the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller. So I want to reiterate to everybody that I am in no way Rachel Maddow, who is my personal hero and helps me understand all of the Russia nonsense. But I do want to use some of her strategies and talking points to disseminate or break down this story for those who don't completely understand what's going on. We're going to begin with the very first, most basic lie that Donald Trump tells the most often, and that is that there was no collusion whatsoever with Russia. And if you can't remember him saying this lie several times, here's a montage of all the times that he has said it.
There was no collusion at all.
No collusion, no nothing. No collusion, no nothing. No collusion. No collusion.
No collusion. No collusion. Well, again, John, there has been no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russians, or Trump and Russians. No collusion. But bottom line, they all say there's no collusion. And there is no collusion. But again, I'll speak to attorneys. I can only say this: there was absolutely no collusion. Everybody knows it. But it has been determined that there is no collusion, and by virtually everybody. Certainly I'll see what happens. But when they have no collusion and nobody's found any collusion at any level.
Well, if there was no collusion at all, there was at least 30 years of failed attempts on behalf of Donald Trump to get a Trump Tower built in Moscow, Russia. And we are not going to cover all 30 years of those failed attempts to get that tower built in Moscow. But I do want to start with this gentleman, or lack of gentleman, or whatever. His name is Felix Sater. He is a Russian-born, mafia-linked felon that Trump hired in 2005 to help him get approval for the Trump Tower that was to be built in Russia. While the deal did fail, Donald Trump continued to maintain his relationship with Sater in the following years. Trump continued on with his begging and shameful groveling towards Russia as well, and he was hoping to eventually get that approval. So now we're going to fast forward to 2015 when Donald Trump announced that he was going to run for president. So being the opportunist that individual Felix Sater is, he thought of Trump's announcing he was running for president was the opportune time to get the process moving again on Trump Tower, Moscow, Russia, because the previous 30 years of failed attempts weren't enough. He wanted to restart it. So in September 2015, Felix Sater reached out to this guy, who is Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen is Donald Trump's former shady lawyer. And Felix Sater met with him to iron out the details and specifics for Trump Tower Moscow. Following that meeting, this is what occurred. Quote, Sater was very confident. I will get Putin on this program and we will get Donald elected, Sater emailed Cohen. Buddy, our boy can become so-called president of the USA, and we can engineer it. I will get all of Putin's team to buy in on this, end quote. So, following that meeting and that very, very shady email that says that we can engineer Donald Trump getting elected, Donald Trump went on to sign the letter of intent on October 28, 2015, which formally established Trump's intent to place a bid to have the Trump Tower Moscow built. Because now that Donald Trump was running for president of the United States, of course Russia was going to let him build the tower now, right? So, it should not be very shocking that since Donald Trump signed the letter of intent and Russia was approving the tower to be built, that Felix Sater was feeling himself. He was very confident. He wanted to pat himself on the back for doing such a great job. So he sent another shady and self-incriminating email to Michael Cohen. Quote, everything will be negotiated and discussed, not with flunkies, but with people who will have dinner with Putin and discuss the issues and get a go-ahead, Sater wrote Cohen on November 3rd. My next steps are very sensitive with Putin's very, very close people. We can pull this off, end quote. We can pull this off. I wonder what he's talking about. So I want to point out that no, it is not illegal for Donald Trump to seek real estate deals and build properties. And it is also not illegal for Donald Trump to fail at making those deals and failing even after he does make those deals. However, the problem with this whole situation is Trump for 30 years has had this undying desire to build Trump Tower Moscow over in Russia. So we're all beginning to wonder that during all this time that Trump has been trying to get the tower built, did Trump happen to do something that allowed Russia to get embarrassing or compromising information on him, which is why Trump is now so adamantly trying to be Russia's best friend, okay? At any rate, let's return back to Michael Cohen, who again is Donald Trump's former personal attorney that did all the negotiations for the Trump Tower, and the Trump Tower still never happened. So, Cohen was brought in and questioned by the House Representative Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee, in which he lied about the following three things. Quote, number one, the Trump Tower Moscow project ended in January 2016 and was not discussed extensively with others in the Trump organization. That was lie number one that he told. Lie number two, Cohen, quote, never agreed to travel to Russia in connection with the Moscow project and was never considered or had never considered asking Trump to travel for the project. And lie number three from Cohen was when he said he did not recall any Russian government response or contact about the Moscow project, end quote. So, these were all lies because first and foremost, the discussions surrounding Trump Tower Moscow did not end in January 2016. They ended in June 2016, and they may have kept going on, and we just don't know about it. Additionally, Cohen, he eventually fessed up and admitted that he did speak to Trump about Trump Tower Moscow over 3 times. Secondly, Cohen did plan a trip to go to Russia, and he planned to take Donald Trump with him, which is why he was seeking in emails to get visas from Russia so that him and Trump can go over there and visit the site that was going to be the Trump Tower Moscow. And lastly, the Russia government did respond back to Michael Cohen, and they did so 6 days after his inquiry, and they spoke on the phone for 20 minutes detailing how the building plans would move forward. So, I do want to reiterate this additional piece of information that came out subsequently, and that was the fact that Donald Trump was so desperate to get this Trump Tower Moscow built that he offered Putin the $50 million penthouse suite. He offered to just give it to Vladimir Putin in exchange for being able to build Trump Tower Moscow. That's how desperate Donald Trump was. At any rate, we now know that Michael Cohen has lied about all these dealings to Congress. And if you didn't know, lying to Congress is a felony on the federal level. So, Because he lied, Michael Cohen is now facing felony charges for lying to Congress, to which he already pled guilty on November 29th, 2018. He pled guilty out of a plea agreement that he has with the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller. So, the plea agreement is that Michael Cohen is going to give information and snitch on Donald Trump to the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller, in exchange for a shorter sentence or lighter punishment for lying to Congress, which again is a felony on the federal level. This is big trouble for Donald Trump, no matter how much he tries to lie about it, because Michael Cohen has concrete evidence as to why Donald Trump was so desperately seeking to have Trump Tower Moscow built, which he tried to lie about for all of 2015 and all of 2016. And we will also know why Trump is so adamantly trying to be their friends. And it's going to lead to something criminal, I'm sure of it, because Donald Trump has been doing everything he can to keep all this a secret from the American people. However, Michael Cohen was not the only one that went down for the count, went down in a blaze of shame. Meet Paul Manafort, who was Donald Trump's campaign chairman for the 2016 elections. And trust me, he's just as dumb as he looks, and I say that for multiple reasons. Manafort, he also had a plea deal with the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller. Paul Manafort is the idiot that most recently accrued all of these tax fraud and tax scheme charges that were felonies, and he's certainly facing a considerable amount of time in prison because of those charges. There are even supplemental charges that Robert Mueller dropped off from the prosecution in exchange for this plea agreement, because Paul Manafort said he was going to give information on Donald Trump in exchange for a lighter, prison sentence, the same way Michael Cohen did. So, at any rate, if Paul Manafort was to go to jail at this point, looking at him, one would consider that he is, any sentence that he gets is going to be a sentence that might be till the end of his life. So, one would think that since he is near, though, those final days, wouldn't he do the right thing so that he could have a lighter punishment, maybe spend more time with his wife, his kids, his family? Why wouldn't he willingly throw Donald Trump underneath the bus to save himself? Because certainly anyone with a functioning brain cell would do just that. Well, come to find out, that's not what Paul Manafort wanted to do. Instead, Paul Manafort has been lying to the special prosecutor this entire time after he signed his plea agreement. Quote, prosecutors working for the special counsel, I call him the special prosecutor, Robert S. Mueller III, said Mr. Manafort's crimes and lies about a variety of subject matters relieved them of all promises they made to him in the plea agreement. But under the terms of the agreement, Mr. Manafort cannot withdraw his guilty plea, end quote. But here's the real kicker. Quote, as it is, the plea agreement specifies that if prosecutors decide that Mr. Manafort has failed to cooperate fully or has given false, misleading, or incomplete information or testimony, they can prosecute him for crimes to which he did not plead guilty in the District of Columbia. They could also conceivably pursue the 10 charges in which the Virginia jury failed to reach a consensus. Mr. Manafort is scheduled to be sentenced in the Virginia case on February 8th, end quote. So again, why would anyone with this guy's track record willingly continue to lie for Donald Trump, continue to incriminate himself for Donald Trump when you have one of the greatest prosecutors in United States history coming after you? I mean, Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor, he was the FBI director, So, at any rate, Paul Manafort, he is continuing to lie and continuing to do Donald Trump's bidding because he's someone who's seeking a pardon from Donald Trump. And if you didn't know, Donald Trump, unfortunately, he does have the authority to pardon all federal level crimes from anyone in the country. Only at the federal level. He can't do it at the state level, though. So that is why Paul Manafort's lawyer, this clown, Kevin Downing, continues to brief or tell Donald Trump's lawyers about all the discussions going on between Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller and Paul Manafort. Now that is that's a critical point there. It's very important. It is not illegal for this to be occurring, but it is extremely counterproductive and unusual to have one criminal that is being investigated and he's cooperating with the prosecutors. It is unusual for that criminal's lawyer to take what is being discussed and shared and go share it with the other criminal that was involved in the same crimes. So, quote, Mr. Downing did not respond to requests for comment, though it was unclear how frequently he spoke to Mr. Trump's lawyers or how much he received his updates, or how much he revealed, His updates helped reassure Mr. Trump's legal team that Mr. Manafort had not implicated the president in any possible wrongdoing. Mr. Giuliani, who has taken an aggressive posture against the Russia investigation since Mr. Trump hired him in April, seized on Mr. Downing's information to unleash lines of attack onto the special counsel, end quote. So if you didn't catch that, this is what the scheme is with Paul Manafort, Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, all those buffoons, okay? Kevin Downing and Paul Manafort are using Paul Manafort and using that plea agreement as a way in to Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller. So that way, Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller will interview him, and they can take those interview questions and go back and report it to Trump so that Trump can know what the special prosecutor has on him and get himself prepared. So, again, while that is not illegal, it should be, in my opinion, okay? Just because something is legal doesn't mean it is the right thing to do. This is, in my opinion, complete and undeniable obstruction of justice. Now, there's one more person that you guys all need to meet, and his name is Roger Stone. He is Donald Trump's longtime homeboy. He is famous for tweeting a while ago that it would soon be time for a prominent Democrat to have their, quote, time in the barrel, end quote, indicating that something bad would happen to them. So, time in the barrel is just a euphemism that is used to illustrate that somebody's going to go through a period of time of physical and or verbal assaults. So shortly after he tweeted that, mysteriously, the Democrats' national email server was hacked by the Russians, and there was information that was leaked out, and of course this prominent Democrat that Roger Stone was attacking, there were a lot of bogus accusations made about him due to these emails. So, Roger Stone spent many months and, perceivably years bragging about how he has had such great connections and communication with WikiLeaks. And WikiLeaks is a person named Julian Assange, and he's a computer hacker, and he resides in and works for Russia. He is the individual, WikiLeaks is also the individual that had his hand in hacking Hillary Clinton's emails and also the Democrats' national emails. So, once the special prosecution began, however, Roger Stone started denying that he ever knew WikiLeaks. And of course he did, right? I mean, that just makes sense. He's actually kind of smart for doing that. I mean, he's smart for denying that he knows them, but he wasn't so smart being on TV bragging about how he knew WikiLeaks. So, but his denials now that he ever knew WikiLeaks was quickly debunked, very quickly debunked, because Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller released another email, because people just can't stop emailing and stop saying stupid shit in emails. There was another irrelevant Republican conspiracy theorist who sent Roger Stone an email giving him a heads up that WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, had gotten Hillary Clinton's damaging emails and was going to soon release them. So, it doesn't stop there, because that same day that he got tipped off from this Republican conspiracy theorist, Roger Stone then the very next day went on to tip off Donald Trump that those emails were coming out. So, this leads to speculation that Donald Trump did know that these emails were coming out before they came out, which is why he was at that one rally or whatever the hell he was doing, saying Russia, get the emails, release the emails, because he knew they were coming. And the fact that he knew they were coming, and the fact that Roger Stone knew they were coming because they were working with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, that is the smoking gun for collusion that Donald Trump says never occurred. Because collusion is working with someone to do something illegal, okay? So this is Roger Stone, this is Donald Trump, Americans working with WikiLeaks and Vladimir Putin and Russia to steal Hillary Clinton's emails, a crime, and to steal the 2016 elections. There's going to be a lot more that comes out of this story, so make sure you keep your eyes on this space. I know I will, and I've got a lot more for you after the break.
Brothers and sisters, it's time, and I know you can feel it.
2.
Let's fight for those who fight for us.
3.
You see, something's happening in America. When we stand together, we have the power.
So, if you didn't know, the government operates almost like any other business that you would encounter in your everyday lives. That is, businesses, they bring in money by selling and offering goods and services at a certain cost to customers. Businesses, however, also have their own costs vis-a-vis expenses, causing them to spend money on things like paying their employees, buying new buildings, paying the bills of the business, etc., etc. You know the deal. So, applying that same business model to government, the money that the government brings in is primarily through the taxes that we all pay. Our income taxes, sales taxes, things like that. The goods and services the government gives in return for our tax dollars are supposed to be things like schools, police, road repairs, Medicare. These also qualify as government expenses because the government has to have money in order to keep offering those goods and services because they have to pay the teachers, the policemen, the road repairs. They have to pay for all of that. So while that is not a hard nor difficult concept for normal people to understand, it is difficult for people like Donald Trump and the Republicans to get. That is because when you're a Republican, you believe in cutting taxes, A, because you want there to be less government involvement in everyday Americans, and you just want to pay less in taxes. So, the Republicans believe in small government and less taxes because they believe in this clusterfuck mentality known as conservatism. And I emphasize that it is a clusterfuck. And it is because they consider themselves as being financially conservative and responsible, meaning they're not going to spend any money. So, most people buy into the bullshit conservatism way of thinking and argument because they are themselves financially frugal. They don't spend a lot of money in their own personal lives. And they also just don't want the government taking any money from them because it's all about the mighty green dollar, okay? No one can just seem to look past that for anything else. And then there are also those that are just so used to having a white privilege driven society that they don't see the need for any additional government sources because they have never been persecuted by society and they haven't had the cards ever stacked against them in ways that are designed for them to fail. So, this approach, this conservatism approach to government, however, has a gamut of problems with it. When you have less government, you have less police, less firemen, less teachers, less health insurance, less armed services, less all of that, etc., etc., you know? And to be quite frank, if we're to use the current Republican behavior with their violent and racist rhetoric, in addition to all the racially motivated terrorist attacks by these white male Republicans, one would quite easily understand why it is not possible to have less government in this country, especially at this time. What is most ironic, with this very flawed Republican method of government is the fact that conservatism in and of itself is designed to fail on its own. And that is because of what we call a deficit. Okay? Recently, when Donald Trump and the brigade of impotent Republican yes men, sorry, I tried to throw that together flawlessly and I failed. The brigade of impotent Republican yes men in Congress cut taxes. They set up a scenario where now the government has less income because we're paying less in taxes, and we have more money going out now because we have not cut our expenses for police, firemen, Medicare, education, armed forces, etc. Deficits are just a more fancy way of saying you have more expenses or money going out than you have income, which is money coming in. And to be fair to Donald Trump, every other legitimate, because he's not legitimate, every legitimate Republican president has cut taxes in the past too. Bush did it, Reagan did it, so on and so forth. And every time they did it, the deficit increased dramatically. Okay? So why do the Republicans continue to cut taxes, knowing full well every time they do it, the economy spirals out of control, and we always end up either in a recession or near a recession that then the next Democrat president has to come and clean up and then not get any credit for. Trust me when I tell you, they're not doing it because they think it's what's best for average Americans. They do it because when they cut the taxes, they cut it in such a way that only the top 2% of the richest people in this country benefit from it. Because that's how taxes work, right? If you make more, you pay more in taxes. So they cut taxes in such a way that if you make a certain amount, they'll cut yours by about 48%, and then they'll cut everybody else's by a lower number. So if you make less, you actually, you really don't benefit from the tax cuts versus the people who make way more, they end up benefiting from it more. So they do that because the rich people benefit from it. And if you're a Republican in Congress, you're likely either rich and or you have rich donors that have bought your votes and you're going to vote in whatever way they tell you to vote. So, if you're wondering, kind of like how I was when I was writing the talking points of this segment, why am I talking about the economy? And I am a complete novice at it. I even had a hard time with microeconomics and macroeconomics in undergrad. I just had to use all these animations to help me help you get through it. Because I want to highlight how the Republicans fail at handling the economy each and every time they get the chance to handle the economy. And that this bullshit method of conservatism is flawed and it's designed to fail on its own because, as you can see, when you cut the taxes, you increase the deficit, meaning you're spending more money. So how in the hell is that conservative? It's conservative for the rich people, but it's not conservative for the Republicans and the people that vote for them. So, now that the Republicans understand, and now that we all understand why the Republican tax cuts are very unpopular, and that is being nice about it, is really more of a shit show, to be honest. The jack-o'-lantern, Donald Trump, was out this week, of course, making more very dumb and confounding statements, which only revealed his incompetence in its most true form. Quote, Donald Trump is demanding top advisors craft a plan to reduce the country's ballooning budget deficits, but he has flummoxed his own aides by repeatedly seeking new spending while ruling out measures needed to address the country's unbalanced budget. We're going to start paying down debt, Trump said during a White House event last month. We have a lot of debt. Trump often uses debt, the total amount the government owes, to refer to the deficit, which is the annual gap between what the government takes in and what it spends. Trump also is not versed in the particulars of the federal budget. I love that jab. That was a nice one. Basically, they're saying Donald Trump don't know shit. Trump repeatedly pushed staffers to spend more on the infrastructure bill this summer, envisioning large projects for many key states. Because the government spends much more than it brings in through taxes, it must borrow money to cover the balance by issuing debt. The U.S. Treasury projects it will issue 1.3 trillion with a T in new debt this year, more than double its borrowing from 1 year ago. Many Republicans have said the tax cuts will pay for themselves, a lie, by producing a massive jump in economic growth. Another lie, and a claim rejected at the time by many economists across the political spectrum. Growth has increased moderately since the cuts took effect, but the increases have fallen well short of the level needed to prevent the cuts from adding to deficits, end quote. So yes, as if being completely and utterly incompetent wasn't enough, Donald Trump now fancies himself as a petulant, spoiled child that is upset that they cannot have their way. He clearly could not make it as a businessman before he started squatting in the White House. So why on earth would anyone trust him with the money for the country? He's had a total of 6 that we know of, 6 business bankruptcies. So again, why would anyone put him in control of the national economy? And that has to be a question that U.S. farmers across the country are asking themselves. They better be asking themselves that question for the following reasons. Quote, a total of 84 farms in the upper Midwest filed for bankruptcy between July 2017 and June 2018, according to the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. That's more than double the number of Chapter 12 filings, which is bankruptcy, during the same period in 2013 and 2014 in Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Montana. Farms that produce corn, soybeans, milk, and beef were suffering due to low global demand and low prices, according to economists, and Trump's trade war is making the problem even worse. China has slapped billions of dollars worth of tariffs on U.S. agriculture exports in response to Trump's tariffs on Chinese products. Other countries, including Canada, have also added duties to U.S. agriculture products in response to Trump's tariff on all imported steel and aluminum, end quote. So basically what they're saying here is that our farmers in the country are losing money in a big way because other countries have placed tariffs on the products produced by those farms. And tariffs are just a tax that you have to pay when someone in China or someone in Canada or someone somewhere else wants to buy something from a farm in the United States. The farm has to pay another tax to get it there, causing them to lose money. Now, what is very clearly stated in that previous quote is that China and Canada and so many other countries are issuing higher tariffs in response to Trump needlessly issuing tariffs on their country's goods that come here. Can't blame them. So, Trump's tariffs have gotten so bad now that these 84 farms have had to file bankruptcy, and Trump had to use $12 billion with a B to make a federal aid package for United States farmers. So much for conservatism, right? Mind you, Republicans, they fought against President Barack Obama tooth and nail when he wanted to and did give stimulus packages and aid packages to the banks and to the motor industry. But you don't hear a peep from Republicans now that Donald Trump needs it due to their failed tax cuts. Better yet, Trump received the majority of the vote from U.S. farmers, right? Because he promised that he was going to protect them. Because they were the forgotten people. What happened? So, you will constantly hear Trump and his blind base of supporters also tout that unemployment is at its lowest and the stock markets are doing just so well, they're booming. I'm not going to debate any of that. Not at all. In fact, all of that is true. What I am going to do, though, is let everyone know that that booming stock market and the very low unemployment for blacks and for everyone is not due to Donald Trump. In fact, it's still the leftover or hangover effect from President Barack Obama. Quote, the impact of President Trump on the macroeconomic performance of the United States economy has been negligible so far, meaning butt kiss. We measure neither an acceleration of growth nor increase in job creation in the U.S. economy relative to an appropriate benchmark. At this point, we are confident in concluding that Donald Trump largely inherited the greatest economy ever, meaning he inherited it from Barack Obama. That said, we also note that there is evidence to date that Donald Trump caused a deterioration of macroeconomic performance, a deterioration, meaning a decline in macroeconomic performance in the U.S. He is a stable genius indeed, end quote. I love the satire. I've got more for you after the break.
The results from those primary elections, women winning big.
This year's elections are shaping up to make political history for women.
Tuesday was a historic night for female candidates, and the numbers are only going to go higher.
Victories pushed the number of women nominees running for the House to at least 183.
Women are now the major party nominees for governor in 11 states.
And D.C. is about to get its first Muslim congresswoman. Democrat Rashida Tlaib won the primary for Michigan's 13th congressional district.
In about 2/3 of the races, Democratic primaries this year, where there has not been an incumbent and there's been a woman running against a man, the woman has won.
History being made in Georgia. Stacey Abrams won the Democratic primary for governor, making her the nation's first black woman to lead a major party's ticket for governor.
I hope that you will all join us in our fight for the future.
It's just amazing what women are doing. They feel this so deeply.
In a lot of ways, this is a response to Trump. Women are stepping up.
Is the future female?
Yeah, I think for the Democrats in 2018, it sure looks that way.
A caravan is defined as a company of travelers on a journey through the desert or hostile regions. On November 25, 2018, what was supposed to be a peaceful and planned protest against Donald Trump's immigration policies turned into a battleground. On one side of the battleground, there was the caravan of immigrants throwing rocks at the Border Patrol agents while also attempting to forcefully and illegally gain entrance into the United States through the border. On the other side, there was the Border Patrol agents using tear gas and flash grenades against the defenseless immigrants. This all resulted in 39 people being arrested. This has led to Republicans viewing these incidents as a true attack on the U.S. border, while Democrats believe the actions of the U.S. Border Patrol of the agents was cruel and unnecessary. So essentially the problem here is how you feel about the law and how you feel about immigrants. You have to consider the Border Patrol's point of view that there were literally thousands of immigrants involved in this protest. But you also have to consider that the immigrant caravan consisted of adults and innocent children. In my humble opinion, I am somewhat actually on the Republican side of this argument. The U.S. border needed to do whatever they needed to do to maintain safety, security, and control. And they did that. They achieved their mission while staying within their legal limits. I mean, Donald Trump, after all, did give them the authority to use lethal force if necessary, meaning he gave them the authority to use violence and even kill the immigrants if they needed to. So, if you didn't know about that, Donald Trump, when he sent those 5,000 troops, armed forces troops, to the border, he also very quietly authorized them to use lethal force, something that kind of went under the radar for a while. So, as unfortunate as that may be, it is within Donald Trump's legal authority to do those things. When he made the lethal force authorization, he did it because of his delusions that there are terrorists within this immigration caravan, and that he also did it to just give red meat to his base of blind supporters that are just a bunch of ravenous people. So, quote, "For weeks, Trump has been making the case, often baselessly, that the migrant caravan poses an immediate and serious danger to the United States. Supported by Republican lawmakers, he's created the specter of a crisis, with little evidence to back that up. Trump has claimed without evidence that there are criminals and unknown Middle Easterners are mixed in, and that these asylum seekers will bring violence and drugs into the United States. His administration has used this rationale to deploy thousands of active duty military to the border in California, Arizona, and Texas to support border agents. There are more troops on the southern border than in the U.S. in Syria, where they're fighting ISIS. So, Donald Trump, I thought fighting terrorism was the most important. The Trump administration expanded their authority to include using lethal force to protect law enforcement in a cabinet memo signed November 20th, end quote. So, as you can see, apparently, the southern border stunt that Donald Trump pulled by having the military go down there, and he's possibly going to extend it into January now. Apparently that was more important than fighting actual terrorists that are actually in Syria, in these ISIS terrorists that are there. There's more troops at the southern border staring at the sun, not doing anything. Not saying that, our armed services people don't do anything. I'm just saying that they're at the border when they could be better served being in Syria fighting the terrorists that you claim are there, Donald Trump. So, I'm not going to politicize this armed services because I respect them. So that's all I'm going to say on that issue. I've said enough. Now, enter Ivanka Trump, Donald Trump's daughter. Okay? She very unwisely thought it was a good idea to present herself on Good Morning America. And while you guys know by now, I have no qualms or reservations about calling anyone a flat-out liar, I can't say that Ivanka Trump was lying with her answer to a very specific question this time. I can't say that she was lying because judging by Ivanka's answer to this question I'm talking about, it was very clear that she is both foolish and ill-prepared. Okay, so Ivanka was very simply asked whether or not she was comfortable with the fact that her father authorized the troops to use lethal force at the border against the immigrants. Instead of answering the question, she tried to be a politician and deflect and say that no one in the administration was considering giving that authorization. But this was not true because her daddy was just all over the TV days before her interview bragging about how he had given the authorization to use lethal force. And Good Morning America came with the receipts. Here's that interview.
There are some very shocking images coming across these days at the border.
Yes.
Gassing families, children. How have you responded to those images?
I think like any other person with a heart, it's devastating to see the images and seeing children put at risk. Running towards the border is heartbreaking. There's no other way to process it. It also makes me angry. It makes me angry that we haven't been able to come together as a nation and change our laws.
Your father has authorized lethal force, he says, if necessary. Does that concern you?
I don't believe that that's what he said, but his primary role as commander-in-chief is obviously to protect the nation's borders. He has to protect our country's security. But lethal force in this case would, that is not, I think, something that anyone's talking about.
But the president on Thanksgiving did say exactly that.
If they have to, they're going to use lethal force. I've given the okay. Yeah, if they have to, I hope they don't have to.
When we pointed it out, Ivanka clarified.
So lethal force under any circumstance would be the last resort, but he is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of this country, so he always has to be able to protect the border. He's not talking about innocence. So he's not talking about innocent asylum seekers.
And with those very idiotic statements, Ivanka Trump reignites the argument of whether or not children inherit stupidity from their parents. Certainly she couldn't just have done it all on her own. So, now, speaking of Ivanka, I want to move on to my new segment, one of my favorite segments that I get to do, and it is I Cannot Be Bothered, where I'm literally going to just tell you all the pieces of news that I cannot be bothered with. These are mostly stories that I feel the media have blown out of proportion, or it's someone doing or saying something stupid, someone doing or saying something that is racist or inciting violence. So, first up, when it comes to Donald Trump versus climate change, I cannot be bothered. On Monday, Donald Trump dismissed a damning report on how climate change is intensifying in the United States. But what's so stupid about him dismissing this report is that this report was produced by people that he hired. That includes 13 federal agencies and 300 climate scientists working for him with his approval, but he's just dismissing this. Quote, one of the problems that a lot of people like myself, we have very high levels of intelligence, but we're not necessarily such believers, Trump said during a freewheeling 20-minute Oval Office interview with the Washington Post, in which he was asked why he was skeptical of the dire national climate assessment his administration released Friday. Asked to whether or not it's man-made and whether or not the effects that you're talking about are there, I don't see it, he added, end quote. And my God, I can't just reiterate to you how difficult it is to read anything that comes out of his mouth because it's incomplete sentences and bullshit nonstop. However, when it comes to Donald Trump, we try our best to deal with it, you know. So number 2 of things I cannot be bothered with. When it comes to Donald Trump, blocking the CIA director Gina Haspel from briefing the United States Senate on Jamal Khashoggi's murder, I can't be bothered. And to add further insult to injury, the Republican senators that are allowing Trump to get away with blocking her from briefing them on this murder, I definitely cannot and will not be bothered. Gina Haspel is the CIA director that went to Saudi Arabia herself to investigate with other intelligence agencies around the country to see who was responsible for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And it was determined that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia ordered that murder and dismembering of Jamal Khashoggi. So, she was blocked by Donald Trump from going to the Senate to give them that information officially on the record. Donald Trump ordered her to not attend, and instead Donald Trump did send the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, whom have no idea what the hell happened because they were not a part of the investigation. So, honestly, I can't be bothered with this story because it should not have been a story to begin with. The United States Senate and the House of Representatives both have oversight of the White House and all the other agencies, and they have those duties issued to them from the Constitution. Okay? So, by law, Donald Trump does not have the authority to block these types of things. Yet, when you have a Republican majority of impotent white male Republicans running the Senate, these types of things happen and they get away with it. Now, number 3, when it comes to Donald Trump and this asinine border wall, I have not, past tense, will not, future tense, and cannot, present tense, be bothered. Last year, I reported on this issue with Donald Trump and this stupid border wall and how he wanted to shut down the government then over the border wall, and this is what I had to say last year. Homeland Security spending to increase by 6.8%. He wants Congress to set aside $2.6 billion for his border security vis-a-vis the wall that's never going to happen. At any rate, it's a whole year later, now in 2018, and Donald Trump is still at the same antics of threatening to shut down the government over this wall that, again, is never going to happen. He didn't even use the $1.5 billion that he was authorized to use to put up new fencing. So now he thinks he's going to get $5 billion towards the stupid wall that is never going to happen. Okay? Some of you might be wondering, how can he, however, being one person, shut down the entire government over the wall? Because he can do that because if Congress passes a law, which is every time they have to do a federal budget spending, it's a law. And they have to pass it between the House and the Senate and whatever. And they have to pass it through them, and then Donald Trump has to sign it into law. Donald Trump, if he decides not to sign it into law, he can veto it, which is his way of blocking it, to which Congress, the Senate, and the House would have to work from scratch and create a new one that he will agree to sign into law. If he does that, the government will definitely shut down. So, I remain confident that we won't even need to go that route because Donald Trump's not stupid enough to let the government stay shut down for too long, because he knows that he will definitely take the brunt end of losing that argument. And I remain even more confident that there will be no wall in 2019 or 2020 or any year thereafter. What is interesting, though, is that the Democrats are trying to attach a special law to the legislation for the federal budget, and that is a law to protect Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller from being terminated by Donald Trump. The Republicans are trying to block this effort because they say it is irrelevant, that there doesn't need to be a law to protect Robert Mueller because Donald Trump, they say, is not going to fire him when he's giving every inclination that he is indeed going to try to fire him. So, a lot of people feel like the Democrats, since they don't take over the House until January of 2019, that the Democrats really, they don't get to have a say because, they are in the minority in the House and in the Senate right now. But the good thing is that in the Senate, in order to pass something like a federal budget spending law bill into becoming a law, you have to have 60 Senate votes. As it stands right now, there are only 51 Republicans. So, I guess the Democrats do get to have a say. I expect that there will be some form of a short-term or temporary government shutdown for a few days because, everyone just has to make their stance clear and known. But there won't be no damn wall. I can promise you that. And I'll come to conclude after the break.
Damning the differences and deciding that what unites us is far stronger than the color of our skin, how many generations we can count ourselves an American, or whether we just got here yesterday, who we love, who we pray to, whether we pray at all, who we voted for last time. None of that small stuff matters now. It is the greatness to which we aspire and the work that we're willing to put into it to achieve it, by which we will be known going forward.
Vladimir Putin, best known for being the oppressive dictator of Russia that doubles as a sadistic murderer. He is a creature formed from corruption and moral turpitude. He, being the dictator of Russian people, is responsible for the following Russian attacks. A Russian activist that opposed him was mysteriously poisoned twice. A former member of the Russian parliament was shot down in broad daylight. The Russian ambassador to the United Nations suddenly dropped dead. And a Russian media executive was found dead in his Washington, D.C. hotel. These are just a few of the 38 prominent Russians that are unsolved murders and suspicious deaths that have occurred since 2014. What they all have in common is that they all were people opposed to Vladimir Putin. Mohammed bin Salman, aka MBS, is the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. Being in the position of wealth and power that he is in, one would assume that MBS was a man without a single problem in the world. but it is clear that he suffers from vast insecurity and a fragile ego. He is the man that is responsible for ordering the murder and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi Arabia native that became a legal U.S. resident. The Crown Prince ordered Jamal Khashoggi's murder because Jamal Khashoggi was a prominent journalist here in the United States known for criticizing MBS. Considering that both Vladimir Putin and MBS can't take a few negative words from journalists and people opposed to their sinister ways, it is not shocking that at the G20 summit this past week, Vladimir Putin and MBS were seen slapping five, smiling and gazing into each other's eyes. The newfound bromance between Vladimir Putin and MBS is without a doubt a shot towards Donald Trump. Vladimir Putin and MBS can see the harm that Donald Trump is doing to the United States by being the global embarrassment that Donald Trump is. Donald Trump single-handedly has isolated the United States from its allies and continues to demote the United States from being the superpower that it once was. And what better way is there to take down a superpower like the United States than to encourage the idiocy and bad behavior from the man that Putin put in the White House? MBS and Putin are encouraging Trump's bad behavior by being mean girls and not letting Trump sit at their lunch table unless he approves of their corrupt ways or does the things that they want him to do, both of which will never fly in the United States. Vladimir Putin and MBS also see that Donald Trump is their biggest fangirl. Trump idolizes MBS and Putin and seeks their approval because he sees them as strong men. This is why Trump imagines that he is one of them whenever you see him walking around very bloated-like and using the bullying tactics of a fourth grader. In Trump's mind, he believes that he is perceived as a tough guy instead of the sexually assaulting, perverted, racist, and very moronic person that he is. If leadership could be bought at Walmart, Donald Trump would be the great value version of leadership. That is to say, he wouldn't come anywhere remotely close to being the name brand version of leadership. Instead, he'd be the very cheap, poorly made, and terrible for health knockoff option of leadership that only few of us have the stomach to take. I want to thank you for watching this week's episode of Backstories. Please remember to like us on Facebook at Backstories, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at @TheBrandonDais, and subscribe to us on iTunes, YouTube, and also now on Spotify and Google Play Music. The information can be found by visiting at our website at backstories-us.com. I look forward to seeing you again next week for another episode of Backstories, which will not be your everyday show on politics.